Now, into the ticket office of Disneyland.
Oh boy, let's do this. Don't think the CIA is going to be trying to hack your second-gen iPod.
I didn't think so. There might have been a lot of illegal music on there. I wouldn't doubt it. But, I mean...
You were supposed to bring death to the flagships, not join them.
Google has found a new way to piss me off.
iTunes is a constant source of embarrassment.
Behind-the-scenes camera crap.
May I present to you the cat?
I am the dog. I can't do it anymore without laughing. I was going to do the whole thing. Welcome, everyone, to the Calling All Platforms podcast. I am your host, Wes, and I'm here with Landon.
Hello.
And Caleb.
Yay.
And we are here to talk all things tech this week. Technically, there's not a lot, but we got some things to talk about.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Oh, yes. All right. Well, why don't we go ahead and start right into this? We're going to get into some Google news here. Looks like Google I.O. may have a date.
Oh,
yes.
Who are they going out with?
They're going out with...
Well, technically, they're in talks with Apple right now.
Well, they've been in bed with Apple
think
for a long
that's
time.
I.O.
So
Those two dabble.
they've
finally
been
moving on.
They've been having their own little, lovers spat for a while. But
True.
This doesn't have a whole lot to do with Apple. This is all about Google I.O. And they did what they always do, and they released a puzzle for people to solve. Then that gives the date of when Google I.O. will be. It took, I think I heard, between 2 and 3 hours for people to solve this, which that's fairly typical. And when I say that, that's like really, really, really smart people doing this puzzle. Like if I tried it, I don't think I'd solve it. That's why I never try.
Really smart or really obsessed people. It's
yes.
Yeah, there you go.
Both.
It's amazing how often those two line up.
Yep. But the official day for Google I.O. this year will be May 14th. And it will be at the Shoreline Amphitheater again. So they've kind of been going there for the last few years, and it's fine. Most people don't mind it. The only downside that a lot of people say is because it's outside, depending on the time of day, they can get sunburned because, it's outside. So everyone always like, if you're going, take sunscreen, lots of it, because you're going to need it. So, but that's all the Google news this week. There's really a lot going on right now.
There it is.
I mean, this is kind of the calm, really. I mean,
yeah.
Dates are going to be announced mostly. That's going to be coming up. Dates for all tech stuff, but not only that, but gaming. I mean, I know E3 is not a thing, but E3 season is going to be starting and ramping up here.
Yeah.
So, and not only that, like I said, you got all these other tech stuff that's happening, and we're going to probably hear rumors and things, Pixel 9s for Google. We're going to hear all sorts of things. So,
oh yeah,
this is just kind of that lull where some people, if you need something, want to get something out there. Now's the time. If you're not a big tech company, be like, hey, look what we're doing. So, but we'll cover it. All right, let's go ahead. We'll move into some general tech news here, and the highlight here is death of the small phone ?
Yeah. So speaking of tech companies that need to get their name out there, I guess, at least when it comes to phones. I mean, not for us, not for anybody that listens to this podcast, because we do cover Asus on a fairly regular basis. Now, listener, I want to say first off, I did put that title or that question in there of death. Is this the death of the small phone? Because, sadly, Caleb is maybe not going to be switching to Android, at least not for a modern phone, because the Zen phone...
my last year's Zen phone.
There you go.
So the Zen phone for the last few years has been Caleb's potential go-to if he switched from iOS, because it was a great size, nice and small and compact, but had all the flagship features. This year's Zen Phone 11 Ultra, as they're calling it, is basically the ROG phone, but not gamified. So it's big. It's got a 6.78-inch display. So like I said, it's a big phone. It's a big one.
It's a big one.
Some other specs before we, contemplate the existence of small phones. It's got Snapdragon 8 Gen 3 chip running Android 14. It is IP68 dust and water resistance. Thank goodness, because if it wasn't, I'd question a lot of things. It has 256 gigs of storage or 512 gigs of storage with 12 gigs of RAM or 16 gigs of RAM, which is a lot.
That's a lot.
Cameras on this thing, it's got 3 on the back, a 50 megapixel main sensor, a 32 megapixel telephoto sensor, and a 13 megapixel ultra wide sensor. If you want to get a good idea of how those are, go watch the Asus ROG phone. Probably, it's probably going to be very similar cameras.
Yeah.
The front camera is a 32 megapixel camera, which is pretty standard. It does have a headphone jack still, so
That's good.
Asus carried that over from. I mean, previous Zen phones had that as well, but from all the things that they got rid of on the ROG phone, that was not one of them. So they got rid of the 2 USB-C ports. This one only has 1. It doesn't have the air triggers on the side for gaming and whatnot. It doesn't have pretty much all the gaming stuff. It doesn't have the screen on the back of the phone, which is fine, even though that was really cool.
Yeah.
The battery on this thing is a 5,500 milliamp hour battery. It does have 65 watt wired charging and 15 watt wireless charging, and also 10 watt reverse wired charging, which is interesting that it's not wireless charging, but wired reverse charging. And it comes in the colors of Eternal Black, Skyline Blue, Misty Gray, and Desert Sand. And it will be available to purchase in April. April 14th is what the expected release date is, which is kind of late. About a month after normal announcement, so
yeah,
that's fun. But yeah, that's the Asus ZenFone 11 Ultra. It's a big phone. It's not your small phone. Now, the only thing that I do have that gives me hope is that they did specifically call this the Ultra. So there is a slight chance of hope that they might release just an Asus ZenFone 11. But why they didn't do that at the same time, I don't know.
I feel like there is a chance of that, but also there's a lot of space between 5.9 inches and 6.8 inches. A lot of opportunity for them to slot a ZenFone 11 non-Ultra in at like 6.5 or 6.3 or something like that.
Yeah.
Instead of tiny like it was before, 5.9. But
it is true.
Yeah.
So, I mean, yeah. It's really unfortunate for a very, small group of people, Caleb being one of those people.
I am so sad. Like, okay, so this past week, Marquez Brownlee, MKBHD, released a video technically about the ZenFone 11 Ultra, even though it was kind of more about the ZenFone 10 and the ZenFone 9 than it was the 11 Ultra. I thought that was hilarious, but it's titled, Small Phones Are Dead and We Killed Them.
Yep.
Somebody posted that on the Mac Rumors forums and said, the problem is not enough people buy small iPhones or small phones in general, so it's a small market, and no wonder Apple doesn't make them anymore. I replied to that because I can't stay quiet about this subject. And I said, look, I watched the video, and well, yeah, there's not really any arguing with the points Marquez makes. It doesn't stop me being irrationally mad at, the world that my 13 mini is probably going to be the last small phone I daily. I went from the 4S to the 5S to the 6S to the 7 Plus and never once thought back until my next upgrade was to the XR, which was so much easier to live with than that 7 Plus had been. Then I pulled out that old 5S, realized that was where the size and hand feel had peaked, and started getting nostalgic. Then the mini phones happened, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven, only to realize that this is actually purgatory and those phones only existed as a flash in the pan to show me exactly what I'd be missing for the rest of my life. To say I feel this whole journey has been a Greek tragedy might be overselling it, but honestly not by that much. I just am so sad. Like, I can't even be angry at this point. Like, the numbers just aren't there for companies like that make flagship phones like Asus, like Apple, like Samsung to actually sell these small flagship phones. And the proof is in the pudding. There's no arguing with the numbers. But it just why? Why are the numbers that way? I don't understand.
Yeah, I mean, like, even for Apple, who I can almost guarantee sold more of each individual of the iPhone Mini 12 and 13 than any small Android phones individually sold. But even for them, it was not enough to justify making a third version because the numbers just weren't there.
The R&D costs are just too high.
Yeah.
And I don't know. It's so sad. My one hope in all of this is that there have been in the past, like currently we're expecting a new version of the iPhone SE to launch maybe this year or next year. Kind of on the fence about which one it'll be. But there have been rumors that Apple has been developing that as a smaller phone, like a 5.8 or a 5.9 inch phone. And, that like past iPhone SEs, it'll be launching sub $500, like $400 to $500, $450 probably. And if that is the case, then that will be my next iPhone. Absolutely no questions asked. The past SEs, slightly older hardware in them and stuff like that, but a really good bargain, like a really good value proposition when they're brand new. And I would just love for Apple to recycle this small form factor using a slightly older processor that they know they understand better, and so they don't have to do as much R&D to make sure that the power targets are right for getting decent battery life out of it, and so on and so forth. They can use older versions of the screens that they've got sitting around or something like that. I don't know. I that's my only hope in all of this, because now that Asus has apparently jumped ship on the small phone boat, there's nobody else on that boat. That boat is empty.
Yeah.
And like my options are to just buy a bigger phone, like 6.1 is kind of the smallest size you can get for your average flagship at this point, or buy a really cheap, really crappy Android phone from some Chinese factory that what they're really making is phones that are easy to smuggle into prisons. And that's like, that's my only option. I was like, okay, cool.
Yeah. It's really unfortunate, but the writing was on the wall, and so I don't blame Asus for doing this, but for that niche market that was there, it's the end of an era, unfortunately.
Yep. I'm so sad.
Sorry, Spin Love.
So sad.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on. We've got a subject where we wanted to talk about in general tech. Electric vehicles.
Yeah. So this one, I've been sitting on this one for a couple weeks now, listener, because we wanted to wait for kind of a slow news week, because this is something that is like an industry-wide discussion. And so, we've mentioned EVs in the past plenty of times, talking about the technologies that's going into them, talking about the new ones that are being developed, talking about Tesla, occasionally mentioning how Elon Musk is related to them, so on and so forth. But at this point, the EV market has, over the past several months, seemed to have hit kind of an inflection point where like the path forward for EVs is suddenly not very clear. It started out with Tesla doing their thing. Like, we're going to make electric vehicles, fully electric, battery-powered vehicles that are going to be as good as regular cars. And they started down that path kind of by themselves, developing a bunch of new technology, getting a whole bunch of funding from the government in order to develop more efficient vehicles, and Elon Musk bankrolling a whole bunch of stuff from his own private fortune. And they managed to, with the Model S, finally release a car that was like, there are compromises, but there's not as many of them as you might think, and there are some advantages that make the compromises worth it in certain circumstances. And that caught everybody's attention. The whole auto industry was on fire, especially all the tech bros, and early adopters started flocking to Tesla like crazy. Tesla keeps developing the cars. They keep improving them. They release new versions of the cars, cheaper versions of the cars, and then other prominent automakers start showing up in the space. They were looking at what Tesla was doing and going, okay, here's how I think we can either change the compromises that we're making or make improvements on what Tesla has already done. And you end up with players in the space that have been very successful. Unfortunately, not the early players that were trying to get into the space like Fisker. They kind of died and reformed like 3 times. I think they're on their 4th iteration right now. It's hard to say. But then you have, some of the later companies that came along, like Rivian, like the Lucid, and then you have the traditional automakers that started getting into it. You've got Ford that's into it with the Mustang Mach-E and the F-150 Lightning. You've got Hyundai that are into it. I think they're up to 3 fully electric models that are just bespoke electric cars that were built from the ground up that way. So Hyundai and Kia both have really good options there. You've got, Mercedes and BMW that have been kind of slowly sprinkling in first electric versions of cars that already existed, and now they've started releasing fully electric cars as well. And yeah, so it's like this has been the growth cycle of the EV market over the past, call it a decade. They've just been kind of exploding, all of the early adopters flocking to them. Then, a couple months ago, came out that the last half of last year, the EV market slowed. Now, to be clear, it didn't shrink. EV market is still growing. More people are buying EVs than are switching from EVs back to gas-powered vehicles, right? There's still growth in the market, but it's not exponential the way it has been. It slowed down quite a bit. And alongside that, so that happened. And then a couple of months later, the news came out that Apple, who has apparently, and this is kind of what started my train of thought down this whole thing, they have been working on, reportedly, rumors, developing a car, presumably an electric vehicle with an emphasis on self-driving technology to compete with Tesla since Tesla launched the Model S almost a decade ago, right? They've been working on this for a long time. In the background, this program has apparently been through its ups and downs, reportedly switches in leadership left and right. And finally, about a month ago, it came out that they had reportedly canned the project and given up on the whole thing. They were moving all of the engineers that had been doing that to completely different projects inside of Apple, and they were just basically getting rid of the entire project. So that kind of got me thinking, those 2 pieces of news. Apple, one of the largest and most profitable companies in the world, has apparently given up on their own efforts to launch an EV, and the EV market as a whole has slowed down despite the indications of other prominent tech giants like, I think, Xiaomi and Huawei and Sony all planning to launch. They've all announced they're launching their own bespoke electric vehicles here in the next year or 2 years. So what does the future of EVs look like? Specifically, now that all of the early adopters are in, seemingly, and it apparently now is down to the rest of us, right? To the normal consumers, the average Joes, to kind of take over the switch to the electric vehicle infrastructure. How does the auto industry transition to us, to the rest of us? Are we on the right track there, or does it look different than how it currently looks? I'm interested to get your guys' thoughts on that.
So I have 2 thoughts. One, before I answer the question, is I haven't been paying as close attention just to the car industry in general, but I have heard things from people that do and people that work in the industry that just over the last, during that big boom of people buying electric cars, there was just a boom of people buying cars. And companies could not keep up with the demand of any car, let alone electric vehicles. And that, buying a new car right now, nobody's doing it. So Ford is even offering 0% financing on Mach-E's and other cars for the life of the loan. Like, that's just to try and get people to
take the cars.
Please buy a vehicle. So like right now, I don't think it has a whole lot to do with the EV market in just by itself. I think it's just the car market in general is just slowed way down. Like people aren't, like everyone bought new cars in the like between 2019 and 2023. And so now, and also during that time, prices were just absolutely ridiculous. So everyone that was thinking of buying a new car that couldn't afford it was like, well, I'll just wait a few more years because the one I've got is still working. So, and that's like most of us, like people that didn't just have oodles of money to spend on whatever they wanted didn't go buy a new car. So I think it's just a car industry thing in general, not so much a EV thing. But then the other thing is when it comes to people like us, like just the average consumer of a vehicle buying into electric vehicles, I think it's getting closer, but I think we need to get that $25,000 car come into play. We're getting closer to that $30,000 mark. There are some in that like baseline EVs that are close to that 30,000. They're still not quite there.
Yeah.
From what I understand, I don't think there's any under 30,000 yet.
I think that technically the cheapest Kia, I can't remember what that one's called, might be like at 30,000 for the base model. If like, you know, they'll be like, it's below 30,000 and it's like 29.59 or something like that. Okay, yeah. Below, sure.
Yeah.
But yes, about 30 is the cheapest.
Yeah. So I think if we start seeing a minimum of probably at least 3 different specific models in that $25,000 price range that have at least 200 miles of range, that's when more people are going to be like, okay, that's about what I was going to spend on a car anyways. It's going to save me money because I don't have to buy gas, because charging an electric vehicle, if you're charging it at home, is anywhere between $13 and $25 for 100% charge. And that's on, 25 is like the biggest battery. Like if you've got a Hummer EV, it's probably about that much money.
Which, to be fair, in the prices that we're talking about for the average consumer, that's not the Hummer EV. That thing's like, what, 120 grand or something like that?
Yeah, no, definitely
really not. Expensive car.
So I do think if we get closer to that price range, like between that $25,000 to $30,000, that's when the average consumer can look at it and be like, okay, that's where I'm going to be buying anyway. So why not look at those?
Yeah.
And then when it comes to the slightly higher than average consumer that can afford the ones that are already out there, but the range is always the issue for a lot of people, and I get that. But more and more cars are starting to come out with base ranges of 300 miles, and then they go up from there. So
yes,
I think if we get batteries to the point that where they can go base model at 400 miles at like a $45,000 car or something like that, that's gonna start jumping again. So I don't think it's gonna happen soon by any means. It's not going to be in the next like 3 or 4 years, probably the next 5 to 10, that we start getting these significant changes to battery technology and just the cost of making these vehicles to where your average consumer can justify buying them. At least that's my opinion on it.
I do think so. Counterpoint to, I guess, kind of the price is that we now have enough electric vehicles on the market that early adopters are starting to sell off their old, most of them Tesla Model 3s, and buy either the new Tesla Model 3 or they're switching over to a Kia or a Hyundai or whatever. And so there are used EVs now hitting the market that are better than just like the Nissan Leaf, which has a maximum range of 80 miles or whatever. And what we're seeing is that the used car market, I think, is maybe a better indication of like how EVs have been received, because, you know, if you bought a 2018, I don't know, something 35 grand or something like that, like a 2018 Nissan Altima that was like mid-level trim or higher level trim, kind of a nicer Nissan. Nothing super fancy. This is just a kind of a generic sedan. You drive it around, it gets you from point A to point B. It's not like crazy exciting or anything like that, but it's reliable, does the job. And you go shopping for that now, you're going to be kind of in the neighborhood of 10 grand, a little bit north of that for that late of a model year. Whereas if you're looking at that for a 2018 Model 3, it's significantly, despite an original starting price that was approximately the same, it's significantly less expensive. And it seems to be reflective of a concern regarding the longevity of the batteries in these EVs and how expensive it is to replace the batteries in an EV, which like you can, right? You can take this into a service. It's a very pricey and lengthy service, but you can for like 10 grand or, well, depending on which vehicle it is, replace the battery pack in a Tesla. And presumably all the rest of these, from the ground up EVs, that's a service that can be done. But, there's definitely like a concern in the used market of, are these things going to hold their value over time? The average consumer buys a car once every 5 to 10 years, and they kind of like expect the resale value of the car that they purchased to be a part of their buying power for the following car after that. So buying an EV right now, probably to the most people, looks kind of like, oh, this is a bad idea because I'm not going to be able to sell it to get a new car 5 or 10 years down the road. So, I do kind of wonder if that, as much as the price, is influencing people's desire to actually buy the things. And I will say that, like, range issues, I think, are an issue. Like, people that are really in favor of EVs kind of make the argument that, yeah, like 300 miles is plenty for everyone. If you're driving more than that and you really just don't want to stop, like you're just, then maybe plan some stops into your drive time, or take breaks on your road trip and that kind of thing. And I'm like, yeah, okay, like I get that, but I don't know. It's the kind of thing that for most people, 300 miles of range, even if it's like cold out and you're going to get significantly less than that, closer to 200 miles of range, is plenty. For like my commute every day is, I think, about like both directions, about 6 miles or 7, maybe 8 miles. I don't know. It's not a lot. 10 at most. So yeah, 200 miles of range is plenty. I could go like an entire week of driving and never hit that. But it's also worth noting that, yes, I do tend to use my car pretty much exclusively for my commute, but also I don't always use it for that. Occasionally, I need it, to drive me on a long trip. And so I think that that's kind of in the back of a lot of consumers' minds, that this is a compromise that I'd have to make. Am I willing to make that just to have an EV? And so I guess the question that a lot of people have been asking is, like, are hybrids a solution to range issues? Right? Like, put a gasoline generator on this thing to charge up the batteries while you drive, and make it a plug-in hybrid, which I will say, hybrids I'm not the biggest fan of that, because it's all the problems of an electric vehicle, mechanically speaking, plus all the problems of a gasoline vehicle, mechanically speaking. And I freaking hate all the problems gasoline vehicles have. Like, holy crap. And not just because I have had a car in the shop for about the past 3 weeks. That's anyways.
That's addition to.
It's just normally I feel this way. This isn't just because my car sucks. But plug-in hybrids are a little bit better, because the gasoline engine isn't actually driving the wheels. All it's doing is charging the batteries, which then drive the wheels. So it's an electric vehicle with a power generator on it. And that's kind of like, okay, sure. Can that be the solution for the average consumer now? Should we be encouraging people to switch to hybrids? Is that going to help them get more used to the concept of having an electric vehicle later on?
Yeah, I see that. I actually don't hate that idea. Like, Ram has announced their Ram 1500 EV, and it's not an EV by, the traditional sense of the word, because it is one of those plug-in hybrids. But it has a battery that will get you 175 miles, which is fine on a plug-in hybrid. Actually, that's well above most plug-in hybrids. And like that can be your daily commute type vehicle right there. At 175 miles, that's more range than most people need.
Oh, yeah.
And then on top of that, with your gasoline engine, you can get up to about 650 miles, which is 200 miles more than almost any other full-size truck that you can buy on the market right now. So
that's solid.
It's phenomenal. So like I really like that, especially in the full-size truck market, because a lot of people like if I had the money, I would go buy the F-150 Lightning right now. That's like at the moment, that's my dream truck. Like that would be fantastic because for me, my commute is 2 miles. That like one way is 1 mile to work. Like my commute is nothing. My truck gets absolutely horrendous gas mileage because that's my commute. So like for me, I would love an F-150 Lightning, and I also don't haul things. Like I don't pull a trailer on a very regular basis, if at all. So to me, something like that is fantastic. But a lot of people buy a truck because they do haul a trailer of some sort, or well, let's be honest. Most people buy a truck because they like the look of a truck.
That's true. Yeah.
So, like, the F-150 Lightning is fine for most people that buy a truck, but there are the ones that need more power. And, I mean, that's where the battery is going to be a nice thing because that gives you more torque directly to the wheels, whereas an engine wasn't going to give you quite that same power, but then you get the range benefits of a gasoline engine. So, I do think in that sense, like for the full-size truck market, I really like what Ram is doing. But I also love what Ford is doing where they actually have a dedicated EV. They still sell regular F-150 with gas. And then, you know, obviously the higher end or the bigger trucks, they need diesel engines. They're not going to have batteries in them for a long time because the power is not quite there yet for those to replace those.
You know, that being said, actually, this is a slight tangent, but Edison Motors, if you haven't heard of them, listener, their slogan is stealing Tesla's idea. And that's why they're called Edison Motors. So they are it's started by a bunch of loggers out of British Columbia, Canada. And their plan is to make vocational heavy haul trucks that are electric, right? They have electric axles and big old battery pack that drives the axles and everything. But they also have a diesel engine. And all it is just a Cat diesel engine, a diesel generator sitting under the hood. So that it runs at a very precisely controlled RPM to get its maximum efficiency, and it just charges the batteries. That's all it does. And they have got their first prototypes have been finished. They built them in a year or something like that because they're using pretty much exclusively off the shelf parts because they also want them to be repairable, which is
nice.
That's refreshing. And so, so the prototypes came together fairly quick because of that. The only things that are custom are the battery packs and the axles for the drivetrain. And then, they've been doing tests with these things and demonstrating kind of the capabilities of this platform, of this concept. And I think that's actually, it's really promising. And they have said that they're working on, so they're starting out with retrofit kits that they will sell people to convert their existing tractors into electric diesel hybrid trucks. And they're making a smaller version of that kit for pickups. So you could basically just take your pickup, take the rear axle off the thing and take the engine out of it, replace the rear axle with a drivetrain, and then put a big old battery pack underneath it and then a diesel generator under the hood. And I think and so essentially what Ram is doing, though, I assume Ram is probably doing a gasoline generator instead of diesel.
Right.
That's kind of I don't know that it matters really which way you go there. But I think that's kind of a really, I think that's an interesting direction to look at this from, because I see this as Ram kind of adapting to the marketplace as it sits, going, the early adopters have spoken. They love the tech. They love the fully electric, advantages that come with that and that kind of thing. But the average consumer isn't quite sold on it because of the compromises that you have to make. So how do we address some of these compromises? One of them, in the case of a truck, is weight. Like the Lightning is heavy. It's already hauling a crap ton of weight before you put a hitch on the back of it. And the Hummer EV is a continent. It's just a mobile landmass that drives down the road. That thing weighs like 10,000 pounds. It's ridiculous. And so they looked at that and they're like, well, if we put a slightly smaller battery in there, and from the range, it sounds like probably about half the size of the battery pack in the F-150 Lightning, and then we just also have a small generator in there to charge the thing, then we can reduce the weight, we can get rid of the range anxiety while maintaining the high torque output of the electric motors and making it so that you can tow stuff because high torque is good, but you can tow it for a long distance because gasoline is good. Yeah. So like, I like this concept. I think that maybe that's the direction that we're going to see the market moving in a little bit more, is taking the electric vehicles that they have built up from the ground up and going, hey, here's a plug-in hybrid version of that car.
Yeah. I mean, same with Landon. I don't keep up too much with it, but I would say that obviously the big thing would be the price, like with that. For example, like if I'm looking for a vehicle, like I've already written off an electric vehicle, not because it's an electric vehicle, America, it's more, I just can't
gasoline
afford
and oil.
Yeah. I just can't afford it. So I've just written it off until the price can come down to where I could be like, oh, okay, I would consider buying. Oh, hey, hun, someone's got their Tesla, whatever, on here. I'm considering this. Let's go look. I would, and I don't think the average consumer would be against it either. If it's like, a Tesla or whatever, I think someone would still look and see, but I think it's definitely that price, I think, is the big thing.
Yeah. Well, and I think, most consumers, you got kind of about 50-50 of consumers that will buy or lease a car new and then will buy pretty much exclusively used. Like right. There tends to not be a whole lot of crossover between those two, and it seems most people it's split kind of right down the middle.
It is. You're right.
And so, the people who are willing to lease or buy new, they're starting to get to the point where you can walk into a Kia dealership and for $30,000 you can walk out of there with an electric vehicle. And that's pretty cool. But for people who buy used, your only options are like used Teslas at this point for the most part. And Teslas roll off the factory floor kind of falling apart. So on the used market, it's like you get into a 5-year-old car and it sounds like you're in a car from the early 90s. That's a problem. Yeah. And so I don't think the used market has really gotten to the point where the average consumer that shops exclusively used can go, oh, hey, I'll do that, unless they're willing to live with a Nissan Leaf or a Chevy Volt. Like those are kind of your only options, or not Volt, the Bolt. The Volt is the plug-in hybrid version. The Bolt is the fully electric version. Anyways.
Yeah. And I think like with all the non-Tesla EVs, they're still so new that those people that are buying new cars aren't getting rid of them yet because they're only 4 to 5 years old at max. Yeah. And especially like a lot of the Hyundais are like 3 years old. They're not that old cars.
Yeah.
And so like all these people that are buying them now new there just isn't a wide variety of used EVs yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is it's a question that I think we don't fully know the answer for, is what is the used EV experience going to be like?
Yeah.
Because, pretty much all of the EVs, when it comes to battery charging logic, are trying to be smart about it. They physically won't let you discharge them past a certain point, and they won't let you charge them past a certain point and stuff like that. Like when you're charging up a Tesla battery pack, you're only charging it up to 80%. It says 100% on the dial, but it's actually 80. They never charge above that because the idea is that in software, it can detect the degradation of the cells over time and then give you a little bit more charge as the cells degrade so that you get the same range for a longer span over the lifetime of the battery. And pretty much all of the EV makers are doing that sort of thing with their batteries, but we're just in the infancy of the used EV market for these like longer range 200 to 300 mile EVs. And it remains to be seen whether or not like the batteries on these are going to become a huge problem. They might. So maybe people are just poised waiting to see.
Yeah, too.
Yeah, I think that's a big thing is the waiting. It's just we're just waiting in a waiting game, you know? And like, depending on how much it does cost to replace a battery in the future, because it'll get cheaper as time goes on. But like the benefit to that could be, say you buy a used Tesla or Rivian or something for 10 grand. But you like if you were in the market for a $20,000 car, you could get a $10,000 used electric vehicle, spend that extra 10 grand on a new battery. You've more or less got a brand new car because the range is going to be more than what the old battery is going to be. It may not be at the same range of what the brand new EVs at $50,000 are going to give you, but it's going to give you more than what you had, and you're spending a fraction of the cost. Yes, the body of the car is not quite as new, but the technology in these EVs, even on the low end, is really good. Even like the Hyundais and the Kias, like the base model of those cars is a pretty high-end vehicle. So
they're really good. And it helps that like there's so few moving parts. Like it's just the battery pack sends electrons to motors that are either on the axle or in the hubs of the wheels, and they just spin it, and the wheels spin. There's like most of the time, if it's on the axle, yes, there is a gearbox. There's a differential sending power to both of the wheels. Some of them have separate motors for like both of the rear wheels or something like that, like the Tesla tri-motors and stuff like that. And the Hummer, I think, also has tri-motor setups, and I think one of the Lucids also has a tri-motor setup. Anyways, those it is pretty much just like, we just got a geared output for this sucker going straight to the wheel, and it's holy crap, so few moving parts and so little to service that so long as the actual physical body of the car and like the suspension linkages and stuff like that continue to hold up over time, which for most cars that's not the first thing that breaks, except for Teslas. Body panels will just randomly fall off and everything. It's a Tesla, so kind of to be expected. But yeah, so long as the rest of that does hold up the way you would expect it to, then it really is just the battery. Like, we just got to see. Which is really funny because that's like saying that you're in your normal car. The thing that is like the most problematic and difficult is the fuel tank. And like, man, if that fuel tank you've got to be concerned about that in your used car. It's like, no, nobody ever checks the gas tank in a used car to be like, is this gas tank okay?
Hey, that being said, I did just have to replace a fuel pump. So
okay, I mean, that's fair. That's fair.
Fair enough.
I guess the last thing on this subject is the killer apps for EVs outside of just the general, being an EV. You get more torque from the thing. It doesn't pollute. It doesn't pollute as much. It's cheaper to fuel the thing up and everything like that. Those are all the advantages of it just being inherently an EV. But then you have stuff like, Tesla's autopilot and that kind of thing. Are these things ever going to matter to the actual, like, the average consumer out there? Because Tesla sure as heck loves to talk a big game about autopilot. I don't think they should.
Yeah.
Frankly. But
I think that's for younger people. I know that sounds bad. But I don't think that's the demographic. I don't know.
I don't even think that that's the case. I think Elon just had it in his mind that this is the future of cars. And it very well might be. But that's still 50 years down the road to get it to actually be good to the point that people actually trust it. So the fact that and that was Apple's whole thing. Like that's what they wanted in a car supposedly, is that they wanted us, like, their concepts that people supposedly saw didn't have steering wheels. Google's
Yeah.
car supposedly didn't have a steering wheel. So it's like, that was the model. It's just Elon was so freaking straightforward about it that it's like, now that's the only thing he just won't ever shut up about it. It's like him and Twitter versus him and autopilot. It's like the same thing. They just shouldn't be a thing. But and like, it's funny, like if they didn't name it autopilot, if they just named it not like a better version of cruise control, that's basically what it is. And every other car already has that. So it's just that other companies aren't advertising it as self-driving autopilot because they're not stupid.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. Generally, from like kind of a broader perspective of the technology involved, yeah, what autopilot is currently, the released version of autopilot, is basically Mercedes or even GM's like high-end cruise control and driver assists, except they're calling it autopilot instead of just calling it adaptive cruise and driving assists.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I think that when you look at these more established automakers that have been in the game for decades and decades and centuries for some of them, they have dealt with every version of the government regulation for safety that is involved with this stuff. They know how hard it is to get the necessary certifications in order to actually have a thing released. And they know that there is a lot of liability brought on their company by even suggesting that their car is in charge of a situation that could result in an accident. And so, yeah, they develop the technology the same as Tesla is doing it, or they steal the technology from Tesla, depending on who you talk to. But they just don't call it autopilot because that'd be kind of stupid. Like I worked for about 8 years for a company that literally makes autonomous vehicles. I left them a few years ago, but I've been in contact with, you know, some of my old coworkers from there for ever since. And the technology has advanced somewhat since I was there, but not sufficient enough for it to be a major difference. And the simple fact of the matter is that the best case scenarios, the only difference between what Tesla is deploying in autopilot or the full self-driving beta right now, between that and what you would see at the DARPA autonomous vehicle challenges back in like 2001 and 2004, is that now, instead of having to have a $10,000 LiDAR strapped to the top of the car that is like literally like a satellite dish on top of the car, in addition to a full-on server rack loaded up with computers in the back of the car in order to process all the data that was coming in, you can now do it on an iPad using commodity cameras. So, like, it's gotten a lot smaller, it's gotten a lot cheaper, but the fundamental capabilities of the system have not changed. All the blind spots that did exist in 2004, 20 years ago, they still exist. We've gotten a little bit better at some of them. There's sensor fusion stuff that's supposed to solve those problems, but the simple fact of the matter is, it's just not possible with the technology that we have today. Maybe self-learning algorithms and AI is going to change that in the future, but we're not even close to that right now. Like, it's not, like Landon said, if you're optimistic, 10 years at least. If you're being realistic, probably at least 25, if not more like 50. It's just, maybe we see it in our lifetimes, but we will be old.
Hey, that's when we could actually utilize the self-driving technology.
That's true. That's true. That's when it would be like the most useful for me personally. So yeah, I feel like people talk a lot about this in regards to EVs. And when Apple first started apparently exploring the concept of releasing their own car, and when you hear companies like Sony, like LG, like Huawei, like these companies that are just tech giants, tech conglomerates, not automakers, talk about EVs that they want to make, automation, autonomy is always right there at the front of that conversation. And they really need to shut up about that, because I think that is making consumers nervous, rightfully so, because consumers are not stupid, mostly.
You know, I think that's a very, very key point to this whole conversation is the companies that are talking about this are not car companies. Yeah, you can say Tesla's a car company. They're not. They're a technology company.
Yes,
They're a
they are.
battery company. They know batteries very well. They know technology very well. Same with LG, Sony, all these companies that are spouting out this autopilot self-driving vehicle crap are not car manufacturers.
Yeah.
Car manufacturers know better. They know where the technology is at because they've been looking into it forever. It's not a new thing. They just know where it's at and what they can do with it. And so they do what they can to not, ruin their image and kill people because
yes,
they're not stupid.
Yeah. And that's very true. Like, listener, peek behind the curtain for you. Ford has had self-driving vehicles on their testing, like proving grounds for their new vehicles for, I want to say about 15 years now. Like fully autonomous vehicles, they just, you tell them to go and do a thing and they go and do that thing. The difference between that and what Tesla is doing or attempting to do is that it's in a controlled proving ground scenario, and they're using it because they literally can't put people in those cars because the odds of them getting in a catastrophic life-ending wreck are extremely high. Some of these things, they're literally trying to flip cars over because they want to test the rollover capability and survivability of their vehicles. But you don't do that with a stunt driver in it, guys. Like, that's not, you do that with a self-driving car. So Ford has been using this technology, like fully autonomous vehicles for, at least 15 years at this point. And that's the military has been deploying self-driving vehicles for at least that long, probably more like 20 years, probably since the DARPA days, because it's a heck of a lot easier to test fire dummy munitions from airplanes at moving targets if you don't have to worry about a dude being in the moving targets. If that's a self-driving car out there on that firing range, you can launch all the missiles at it you want. Doesn't matter if you hit it. It's fine. Nobody died. It only cost like, I don't know, 500 million or something like that.
Nothing big.
Nothing crazy. But yeah, so there's a lot of conversation like that. But I think that at least on that point, we can say that maybe that's the best thing that happened with this whole Apple thing. Everybody's been talking about launching an electric car because Apple has been rumored to be launching an electric car. They didn't want to, we're going to get out in front of this, like Samsung with their old watches. But Apple has now gotten out of it, possibly because they realized that self-driving autonomous vehicles are really hard.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing to crack, even with the best engineering minds in the world. And hopefully it sends a message to everyone else, except for Tesla, because Elon Musk will not hear any messages from anyone.
From anybody. Yeah.
Doesn't have voicemail, weirdly.
Yeah.
Anyways, I feel like that pretty well covers the state of EVs as a whole. It's a complicated situation right now, and like whether an EV is right for you, listener, is going to depend a lot on your personal circumstance. If you have questions you'd like us to talk about related to EVs, go ahead and let us know. Get in contact with us at the various sources that Wes is going to list to you at the end of the episode. But it's just something that kind of got brought up with the changes in the EV market as a whole over the past few months. And also, Apple canceled their project. What does that mean for the rest of the industry as a whole? And honestly, it probably just means that stop talking about autonomous vehicles, guys, because they're not happening. It's not real.
Yeah.
Don't listen to Elon.
I think overall, I'm still optimistic about where the market is going. Honestly, I think Apple getting out of it is not a bad thing. I think it's a perfectly fine thing because...
Honestly, no complaints.
We don't need Apple trying to take over another thing that they aren't going to take over because they're not good at it.
Yeah.
So I'm perfectly fine with that. And it makes it so other companies may not try to do the same thing. I want these technology companies to partner with car manufacturers to make...
Yes.
Having Apple inside of your car, Google inside of your car, that's great. Great. Car manufacturers are not technology companies, and they've proven that over the years because the technology in some of these cars is awful. So,
Oh man, it
Ugh.
is so funny to me to see like the built-in infotainment system on like BMWs, brand new, $100,000+ sports sedans, grand touring sedans, stuff like that. And you sit down and you'll see somebody like run their finger to swipe from one screen of the infotainment to the next screen or something like that, and it has all of the responsiveness of like a 13-year-old iPad running like the most recent version of iPad OS that it can, which is to say probably 2 or 3 versions past what you should have stopped with. And like the battery is failing, and that's what it feels like. You swipe and like 2 seconds later something happens. You push a button and then you wait. Like,
Yeah.
Holy crap, this feels like a solved problem to anybody with a modern smartphone. And then to see companies putting stuff like that into, hey, this car cost $150,000. I'm all like, are you joking? What was I paying for? Just strap a $600 iPad to the dashboard. It would be so much better. Anyways.
True.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Apple getting out of this will hopefully shift the conversation more in the direction of the traditional automakers, because I feel like they're moving in the right direction. And Tesla, while they started this all off and it was good, I think that Tesla is still moving it, like they're no longer kind of leading the charge in the direction that the auto industry should go with EVs.
Right.
They're not necessarily behind, but I feel like their priorities are a little out of whack, and maybe they ought to start focusing on making sure that the interior trim of their vehicles doesn't just fall off after a couple of years, instead of trying to get the thing to drive itself, because that's not going to happen in the near future. You know, just
couple pointers. All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to the next thing here. We're going to go into a little bit of gaming. So the PS5 Pro. Did you know that's a thing? Apparently, it had leaked.
No, Sony knew.
Yeah, Sony knew. Well, at first it had leaked. It had some leaked documents. Didn't say where it leaked, but they're calling it the Trinity, I believe is the code name for the PlayStation 5 Pro. It was leaked quite a few times, actually. So a lot of other sources, people that have had things like this have said, yep. Yep. And
looks about right.
So it's quite interesting, this percentage. It actually, a couple things that it did say on here, they said that its raw rendering performance is supposed to be 45% faster than the base PS5.
Wow.
We report on teraflops because we like the name, right? And we don't know what that is actually measuring.
So what does that mean? Floating point operations, listener. I have no idea how that relates to graphics rendering, but that's what the acronym stands for.
This is what it is. So let's give us a base. Let's remind ourselves about teraflops and where we are with the consoles. So the base PlayStation 5 model, it landed about 10 teraflops. The base Xbox Series X is about 12 teraflops. Okay? So this is supposed to be, this leaked number here it was talking about is actually supposed to be 67 teraflops for this PlayStation Pro. What? So this is they were saying it's supposed to do super resolution upscaling feature, 4K and 8K support, and GPU operations, a higher performance here. So,
okay, what? That's all right. So first of all, if you want to transfer an 8K signal, it doesn't matter if it's upscaled on the console via AI features like super resolution, or if it's natively rendered like NVIDIA claimed the 3090 could do. Newsflash, it couldn't. Yeah. You have to have, like, I think DisplayPort 2.1 or HDMI 2.1.
Yep.
Or DisplayPort 1.4 or something like that. Like versions of both of these ports that, listener, I can pretty much guarantee you, your TV don't have. Like,
I think they finally got, so TVs.
if
Yes,
you want
TVs
to buy,
mostly, but
like, you'd have to buy an 8K TV. Nobody sells those. Like, you can buy one from LG. I'm pretty sure you can get one from Samsung too. Also pretty confident both of them are in the neighborhood of like 10 grand. So that's such, first of all, that's a stupid production target to have for a console, Sony. Just saying. Second of all, 64 teraflops from 10 teraflops. Clearly, I don't know what teraflops means.
67, actually.
67. Okay, yeah. Oh, sorry. Gee.
Come on, if you're going to spout the numbers, get it
If
right.
we're going to spout these numbers, we
What
need to get
the
these
heck?
correct, okay?
What does that mean? How does
Exactly.
that relate to graphics performance? It can't possibly, because that's suggesting this is over 6 times as powerful as the original PlayStation 5, which ostensibly I'm going to assume is built off of the same basic processor architecture. Like, they're not like switching from using, oh yeah, this is an 8-core AMD CPU to like, oh yeah, we've put like a 94-core or 96-core EPIC processor in here. It's freaking like, what? No, that's what? This is like,
so
I don't know. Are they shipping these PS5 Pros with a 4090 in them or something like that? That just, what the heck is that even supposed to mean, guys?
So with these leaks, I figured I'd bring this up because I if we remember when this generation we're in now for consoles, we were talking about, they were like touting 4K, 60 hertz, sometimes going up to 120, right? They were supposed to be, that was the benchmark. Now that these have been out for about 2 to 3 years, we know that's not the benchmark for these.
No,
as someone that does play on a console, 4K at 60 does look good, but there are sacrifices. Like, there are. Yes. So I think what this is trying to be, I know teraflops and all this, I think this is actually true 4K at 60. I want to say would be more close to what they're trying to get to. Because the games that have been coming out, let's call these these actual generation games. So I'm going to just tout out Starfield. Crap, I just lost the game that just came out. Well, these newer actual next-gen games that have come out are locked at 30 on these consoles. They don't go past 30 frames.
Right.
Now, there are some games that say it runs at 30 unlocked, and maybe that they're unlocked means that this next hardware can help that. So, I think this is just a mid-gen refresh, which is good. And yes, there's going to be numbers. And because the way that people report and console war right now,
those numbers are meaningless.
And I think, yes, there may be a better things to come, which would be good. This mid-gen, or whatever you want to call this, the PlayStation 5 Pro. We like hardware. We like that it's better. But going from 10 teraflops to 67, even though we don't know what this is measuring,
it's clearly not measuring anything that actually matters to you, listener. I think that's the takeaway. Because if they can make that claim, then it's pointless. Because there's no way in heck this thing is going to be 6.7 times faster than the PlayStation 5. That's not how physics works. Like, they have not made that much of an improvement over the past couple of years when nobody else has made that much of an improvement. That's just okay. That's silly.
So they did say that these their dev kits have gone out. They actually went out to internal publishers in September of 2023, and then obviously top third-party publishers have gotten this. So there might be more that's coming out. So obviously there is a dev kit. I mean, there is the next Switch Nintendo dev kit that's been running around too for the next Switch that's coming.
Yeah.
But I would just say this looks cool, but just hold back your expectations of, this is supposed to be a monster.
Yeah, it's
like
it's going to be better, but it's not going to be like,
it will be better. We will say
it's not going to be a monster.
But it's not going to
put it that way.
I just wish teraflops. Remember when we first started reporting on teraflops?
Oh, yeah. No, I remember like breaking down a whole okay, so here's how many teraflops my GPU and my computer has.
Right.
Versus the number of teraflops that you're going to be able to get out of the Project Scorpio Xbox and stuff like that. And like, It was 6, I think, teraflops
Yeah, it
or
was like
something like
5 or
that.
6. Yeah.
Yeah, at the time. And you know what? I'm going to be completely honest with you, listener. My little 6 teraflop GPU in my gaming PC has been doing absolutely fine.
Yeah.
I actually played Starfield on it.
It's true, he did.
It ran. Now, I got about halfway through, like, kind of the opening little tutorial level area thing, and realized that AMD's super resolution, it's just something super resolution. What do they even call that? Fidelity. That's it. Fidelity super resolution. FSR. I'm like, what's the acronym for this thing? Anyways, I realized that was turned on by default and was running, so that like my render output like scale for this thing was 1080p, but it was actually rendering the game, I think it's 720p, maybe even lower than that. Yeah. And so, it had some weird little artifacting stuff going on, but generally it actually looked pretty good. And I was like, oh, that's nice. This is actually allowing my old kind of crappy GPU to keep up with this brand new AAA game in a way that I can play. The thing that was letting me down was the hard drive.
True.
Like, oh my gosh, I had, to be clear, it's an older GPU. It only has 4 gigs of VRAM, so it couldn't load that many textures into RAM on the GPU. So it was constantly having to switch them back. Like, anytime I moved to a new area, had to switch all the textures back onto the hard drive and load a whole new set of textures into RAM. And that took a dog's age. Like, oh my gosh, that was so slow. And like, the game just didn't know how to handle it. It would just like stop. Everything would just stop rendering. I couldn't move. Everything would just pause for like 30 seconds, and then it would load everything up, and then, okay, now you can play again. So, oh man. So turns out Starfield, it's not the age of your GPU that's the problem. It's how much VRAM it has, and whether or not you have the game saved on a fast storage solution or a slow one. Because I had it stored on like a 3 terabyte archival hard drive. Did not like that. If I'd put it on my SSD, might have worked a little bit better. But it was like a 120 gigabyte install, and I only have a 500 gig SSD. So that was a problem. I don't know. AAA gaming, apparently not for me.
But I guess right we like to report on hardware. We like hardware, true. So that's why I was reporting it. But I just wanted to also not only tell you what was being leaked, but also to bring your expectations back a little.
Yes.
I mean, if that's a 60, okay, if we're thinking what 67 teraflops means, you might want to start saving money now, because this ain't going to be no $500 console.
No, this
67.
This is going to be a $4.7 million Cray supercomputer is what this is going to be. If that's that's not teraflops mean. What is, man, I got to do some research or something. Like, what does this mean? I know it's floating point operations. I thought it was just like an indication of how well the processor did a certain type of calculation. And
it says custom machine learning architecture that delivers 300 tops. Which is your...
Wait, tops is different than flops. What is...
It's just what they've written here. Trillions of operations per second.
Okay, so that is different than teraflops.
But that's what it says, the custom machine learning architecture with that. But it also says 67 teraflops.
That is...
Which is trillions of floating point operations per second.
Yeah.
Of a GPU.
So,
maybe whoever wrote this article misheard, and they actually said 627, but they heard 67.
That would not be good, going from 10 to 67.
I agree.
I agree. That's what they said.
But
well, here we'll just put it this way, listener. It's like, whose line is it anyways? The numbers are all made up, and
points don't matter.
Points don't matter.
Oh my gosh, right? Well, so those of you, listener, if you're hardware enthusiasts, things like that, I mean, if it's leaked like this, there's probably going to be more stuff that Sony may come out and say. Who knows? The big thing that they're wanting to make sure this happens, when they want to be the console that can run GTA the best that comes out. Apparently, GTA is a very, 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 very big game for people. So we'll see. And where GTA is technically a next-gen game, I mean, all these next-gen games are pushing this hardware already. And where the people are like, well, we're just locking these games at 30. Maybe we'll let it be unlocked at 30. It's telling you something that already these consoles are past their prime.
Can any of these games really call themselves next gen if they're not quadruple A?
Oh, jeez. Yeah, they are not Ubisoft, right? Ubisoft quadruple A's. Anyway,
that's what it's going to be. This console will play exclusively quadruple A games
for Ubisoft.
If you dare put in a AAA game, it just won't even launch.
It'll laugh at you.
The disc back out at you.
It's like, sorry, I'm not for this.
Get that garbage out of here.
Anywho, that's all the gaming news that we have here. And I think we're going to bring this episode to an end unless Landon has one more thing.
No.
All right. Well, listener, we appreciate you listening all the way through the episode, even though it's kind of a interesting discussion about electric vehicles. And if you want us to talk about any other topics or anything like that, or do some more research on something and report on it, you can get a hold of us to let us know on our social media platforms, as well as callingallplatforms.com. And there may be a video that might come up here soon on our YouTube channel.
Look, yeah.
Pending. Video pending. We'll say that.
Pending.
Loading. Go ahead and hit the subscribe and alert bells and all the fun little things that everyone says for that, so you know that it's there once it happens.
When it happens.
All right, dear listener. Have a good week.
Bye-bye.
See ya.
Calling All Platforms is a production of Supporter Sound Studios. To learn more about how you can support the podcast, go to www.patreon.com/callingallplatforms.